A millionaire forced his son to marry a gardener. The family laughed at him, but 2 years later everyone was surprised at the luxurious Thompson mansion. James Thompson, a respected and powerful businessman, watched his son Peter with concern from the window of his office. The 25-year-old was arriving in his luxury sports car, visibly drunk and surrounded by friends who were laughing boisterously. James sighed, aware that the situation with his son was reaching an unsustainable point. Peter Thompson was the heir to a business empire, but his irresponsible behavior threatened to destroy everything James had built with so much effort. The endless parties, scandals in the press, and constant waste were undermining the family's reputation and jeopardizing the company's future. As James reflected on how to address the problem, his gaze fell on the garden, where a young woman, with chestnut hair and sun-bronzed skin, worked diligently among the flowers. It was Sarah Mitchell, the new gardener he had hired just a month ago. James had noticed her dedication and impeccable work ethic. Despite her youth, Sarah seemed to possess a maturity and responsibility that his own son lacked. It was at that moment when a bold, perhaps crazy idea crossed James's mind. What if he could kill 2 birds with one stone? On one hand, teach Peter the value of responsibility and hard work, and on the other, help Sarah, who he had heard was struggling to support her sick mother while studying at night. With determination, James went down the stairs and headed to the garden. Sarah, seeing him approach, stood up and greeted him respectfully. "Mr. Thompson, can I help you with something?" James looked at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Sarah, could you accompany me to my office? There's an important matter I'd like to discuss with you." Intrigued and a little nervous, Sarah nodded and followed James into the mansion. Meanwhile, Peter, who could barely stand, stumbled in through the front door. In the office, James explained to Sarah his concern for Peter and his crazy plan. He proposed a deal: marry Peter for a year, in exchange for James paying for her mother's medical treatments and financing her university studies. Sarah, stunned, couldn't believe what she was hearing. "But Mr. Thompson, how can you ask me something like that? I barely know your son, and he doesn't even know I exist." James nodded understandingly. "I know, Sarah. It's an unconventional proposal, but I think it could benefit us all. You would get the help you need for your mother and your studies, and Peter could learn from you the value of hard work and responsibility." Sarah remained silent, weighing the offer. On one hand, the idea of an arranged marriage seemed outdated and somewhat offensive to her. On the other hand, the opportunity to secure treatment for her mother and her own education was tempting. After a few moments of reflection, she responded, "I need time to think about it, Mr. Thompson. It's a very important decision." James nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need. But remember, this offer could change your life and your mother's." As Sarah left the office, stunned by the proposal, she came face to face with Peter in the hallway. The young man, still under the influence of alcohol, looked at her curiously. "And who are you?" he asked, slurring his words. Sarah, uncomfortable, replied, "I'm Sarah, the gardener." Peter let out a mocking laugh. "The gardener? And what are you doing in here? Have the plants invaded the house?" Before Sarah could respond, James's voice resonated from the office. "Peter, come here immediately. We need to talk." Peter, rolling his eyes, staggered towards his father's office, leaving Sarah in the hallway, confused and worried about what was about to happen. In the office, James confronted his son. "Peter, this can't continue. Your behavior is out of control and is affecting the company and our family." Peter, defiant, replied, "And what are you going to do, Dad? Punish me? Take away my allowance? I'm an adult. You can't control me." James, maintaining his calm, replied, "You're right. You are an adult. And as an adult, it's time you take on responsibilities. I've made a decision. You will marry Sarah, the gardener." Peter, believing he had misheard due to his drunken state, let out a laugh. "What? The girl from the hallway? Dad, I think you're the one who's had too much to drink." "It's not a joke, Peter," James said firmly. "You will marry Sarah for a year. During that time, you will learn to be responsible, to work hard, and to value what you have. If you don't, you'll lose your inheritance and your position in the company." The smile faded from Peter's face, replaced by an expression of disbelief and anger. "You can't be serious, I refuse." James remained firm. "It's your decision, Peter. You can accept this agreement and prove that you're capable of change, or you can reject it and lose everything. You choose." Peter, feeling the alcohol dissipating rapidly in the face of the gravity of the situation, looked at his father with a mixture of anger and fear. "This is madness, Dad. You can't force me to marry a stranger." "I'm not forcing you, Peter," James replied. "I'm giving you an opportunity to redeem yourself and grow as a person. Think about it carefully before making a decision." With these words, James ended the conversation, leaving Peter alone in the office, stunned and confused. Meanwhile, Sarah had returned to her small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea between her hands, she tried to process James Thompson's proposal. Her mother, Emily, watched her with concern from the couch where she spent most of her days due to her illness. "What's wrong, honey? You look worried," Emily asked weakly. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. How could she explain to her mother the crazy proposal she had just received? Finally, she decided to be honest. "Mom, Mr. Thompson made me an unusual proposal," she began. "He asked me to marry his son Peter for a year." Emily almost choked on the water she was drinking. "What? Marry? But you barely know that boy. Why would he ask you something like that?" Sarah proceeded to explain to her mother the details of the agreement: the one-year marriage, James's promise to pay for her studies, and Emily's medical treatment. As she spoke, Sarah could see her mother's expression change from surprise to concern, and finally to a mixture of hope and guilt. "Sarah, you can't accept that," Emily said with tears in her eyes. "It's too much. I don't want you to sacrifice your happiness for me." Sarah approached her mother and hugged her tenderly. "Mom, it's not a sacrifice. It's an opportunity. Think about it. We could pay for your treatment. I could finish my studies, and it would only be for a year." Emily took her daughter's hands in hers. "But honey, what if you fall in love? What if they hurt you? We don't know anything about this." "Peter," Sarah smiled, with determination. "Don't worry, Mom, I know how to take care of myself. Besides, I don't think love has anything to do with this. It will be an agreement, nothing more." As mother and daughter discussed the pros and cons of the proposal, in the Thompson mansion, Peter was facing his own dilemma. Locked in his room, he tried to imagine what his life would be like, married to the gardener. The idea seemed absurd to him, but his father's words echoed in his mind. It was this, or lose everything. The next morning, both Sarah and Peter presented themselves in James's office, each having made their decision. "I accept," they said in unison, surprising each other. James, pleased but cautious, looked at them both. "Well, then it's decided. You'll get married in a week. Remember, this is a one-year agreement. What happens after that depends on you." As they left the office, Peter and Sarah looked at each other, sizing each other up. He with his rich kid appearance and arrogant attitude, she with her simplicity and determination. Both wondered what they had gotten themselves into and how they would survive this marriage of convenience. What neither of them knew was that this unexpected agreement was about to change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The news of Peter Thompson and Sarah Mitchell's engagement spread like wildfire through the city's social circles. Peter's friends couldn't believe that the eternal bachelor and party animal was about to settle down, much less with the gardener of the family mansion. Rumors and speculations were not long in coming. The wedding day arrived faster than either of them expected. In an intimate ceremony at the Thompson mansion, Peter and Sarah became husband and wife before a small group of guests. Emily, Sarah's mother, watched the scene with a mixture of pride and concern, while James Thompson maintained a neutral expression, hoping his plan would work. After the ceremony, the newlyweds moved into a separate wing of the Thompson mansion. James had insisted they live together to keep up appearances, but had provided them with separate spaces within the same apartment. The first days were awkward and tense. Peter and Sarah barely spoke, limiting themselves to polite exchanges. When they crossed paths in common areas, Peter continued with his lifestyle, going out at night and returning at dawn, while Sarah divided her time between her work in the garden, her studies, and visits to her mother. One morning, a few days after the wedding, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Peter entered, looking disheveled and clearly hungover. "Good morning," Sarah murmured without looking up from the pan where she was preparing some scrambled eggs. Peter grunted in response and slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. The smell of food seemed to revive him a bit. "Is there coffee?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Sarah nodded and served him a cup. Peter took it gratefully and took a long sip. "Thanks," he said, surprising Sarah with his gratitude. "You're welcome," she responded, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "You should eat something, it'll help with the hangover." Peter looked at her curiously. "How do you know I have a hangover?" Sarah couldn't help a small smile. "You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. Besides, I heard you come in at 5 in the morning. Peter had the decency to look a bit ashamed. "Sorry if I woke you up." "Don't worry about it," Sarah replied, sitting across from him with her own plate. "But you should be careful. Your father won't be very happy if you keep up this behavior." Peter frowned. "My father doesn't have to find out, and you don't have to be his spy." Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm not anyone's spy, Peter. But remember that this agreement has a purpose. If you don't fulfill your part, we'll both lose." Peter remained silent, chewing his breakfast with a thoughtful expression. Finally, he spoke. "Why did you accept this deal, Sarah? You don't seem like the type of person who would marry for money." Sarah sighed. "I didn't do it for money, I did it for my mother. She needs medical treatments we can't afford, and also for my studies. I want to finish my degree and be able to offer a better life to my family." Peter looked at her with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Wow, that's admirable. I don't even know what I want to do with my life." "It's never too late to find out," Sarah responded. "You have an opportunity many would wish for, a family business. Resources isn't. There anything you're passionate about?" Peter shrugged. "I guess I've never really thought about it. I've always had everything I wanted without having to make an effort." "Maybe it's time to change that," Sarah suggested. "Why don't you come with me to the garden today? I could teach you some things about gardening. It can be therapeutic." Peter looked at her as if she had proposed climbing Everest. "Me? Gardening? I don't think that's my thing." Sarah stood up and began to collect the plates. "You'll never know if you don't try. Besides, what else do you have to do today?" Caught by Sarah's logic and without a valid excuse, Peter finally agreed. "Okay, but just for a little while." That morning, under the scorching sun, Peter experienced for the first time what it meant to work with his hands. Sarah patiently taught him how to plant seeds, prune bushes, and water the flowers. To his surprise, Peter discovered that there was something satisfying about seeing the immediate result of his work. "Not bad," Peter admitted, looking at the small flower bed he had managed to arrange under Sarah's guidance. "Although I think I still prefer parties to this." Sarah laughed. "Rome wasn't built in a day, but you've done a good job for your first time." From the window of his office, James observed the scene with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Seeing his son working in the garden was a refreshing change, but he knew that one day of honest work wasn't enough to change years of ingrained habits. The following days brought an unexpected routine. Every morning, Sarah invited Peter to accompany her to the garden, and to his own surprise, he accepted more often than he refused, little by little. Peter began to show interest in plant care, asking questions and suggesting ideas to improve the garden design. One afternoon, as they worked together on a new rose bed, Peter dared to ask, "Sarah, how's your mother? Are the treatments working?" Sarah, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice, replied, "She's improving little by little. The doctors are optimistic. Thanks for asking." Peter nodded, feeling strangely satisfied for having asked. "I'm glad if you need anything at all, just tell me." Sarah looked at him with a new appreciation. "Thank you, Peter. I'll keep that in mind." As the weeks passed, the dynamic between Peter and Sarah began to change. Conversations became more frequent and less forced. They regularly shared meals and sometimes even watched movies together at night. Peter started going out less and spending more time at home, discovering that he enjoyed Sarah's quiet company more than he would have imagined. However, not everything was rosy. Peter's old friends didn't understand his sudden change in lifestyle and constantly pressured him to return to his old ways. One night, after weeks of insistence, Peter gave in and went out with them. Sarah stayed up late, worried. When Peter finally arrived past midnight, he was sober and seemed dejected. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, finding him in the living room. Peter looked at her with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Yeah, it's just it wasn't the same. I didn't have fun like before. Everything seemed so empty." Sarah sat next to him on the couch. "Maybe you're maturing, Peter. There's nothing wrong with that." Peter looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they had gotten married. He saw the concern in her eyes, the kindness in her face, and felt something he hadn't felt before. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. For being patient with me, for teaching me, for being here." Sarah, moved by the sincerity in his voice, took his hand. "We're in this together, remember?" That moment marked a turning point in their relationship. From then on, Peter began to take his responsibilities more seriously. He started to take an interest in the family business, asking his father to teach him the ins and outs of the company. James, although skeptical at first, was pleasantly surprised by his son's sudden interest. Sarah, for her part, continued with her studies, now with Peter's full support, who even helped her review for her exams. The couple began to function as a team, supporting each other in their respective goals. However, as their closeness grew, so did an underlying tension. Both began to feel an attraction that went beyond friendship, but neither dared to admit it. After all, their marriage was a temporary agreement. Or was it? The situation came to a head when 6 months after their wedding, Peter and Sarah were invited to a charity gala. It was the first time they presented themselves together in society as a married couple. Sarah, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, felt out of place among high society. Peter, noticing her discomfort, didn't leave her side all night, proudly introducing her to his acquaintances and dancing exclusively with her. "You look beautiful tonight," Peter whispered to her as they danced a waltz. Sarah blushed. "Thank you, you look very handsome too." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to disappear around them. They slowly drew closer, their lips about to touch. "Peter, my friend!" The strident voice of one of Peter's old party companions broke the moment. "What's happened to you? We don't see you around anymore." Peter, visibly annoyed by the interruption, replied firmly, "I've been busy, Mike. Things have changed." Mike looked at Sarah with disdain. "I see your gardener has you well domesticated, huh?" Before Peter could respond, Sarah intervened calmly. "I prefer the term wife, if you don't mind, and Peter isn't domesticated, he's maturing. There's a big difference." Peter looked at her with admiration and pride. Taking her hand, he addressed Mike. "If you'll excuse us, my wife and I have to go. It was a pleasure seeing you, Mike." As they walked away, Peter whispered to Sarah, "That was incredible, thank you for defending me." Sarah smiled. "We're a team, remember?" That night, back at home, the tension between them was palpable. Standing in front of the doors to their respective rooms, they hesitated. "Good night, Peter," Sarah finally said with a touch of reluctance in her voice. "Good night, Sarah," he responded, not moving. They looked at each other for a long moment, both aware that something had changed between them. Finally, Peter stepped forward and softly kissed Sarah's cheek. "Thank you for tonight," he murmured before retreating to his room. Sarah stood there, touching her cheek where Peter's lips had been, her heart beating rapidly. She realized she was in danger of falling in love with her convenience husband, and she didn't know how to handle that revelation. Meanwhile, in his room, Peter struggled with similar feelings. For the first time in his life, he felt something real and deep for someone, and that someone happened to be the woman he had married through a business agreement. As they approached the 6-month mark of their marriage, both Peter and Sarah found themselves at an emotional crossroads, uncertain about how to proceed and fearful of the changes their growing feelings could bring to their carefully structured agreement. The change in the dynamic between Peter and Sarah didn't go unnoticed by James Thompson. The family patriarch observed with growing interest as his son, previously irresponsible and carefree, gradually transformed into a mature and committed man. However, James also noticed the furtive glances, the accidental touches, and the undeniable tension between the young couple. One morning, while Peter was in a business meeting, James decided to have a conversation with his daughter-in-law. He found Sarah in the greenhouse, tending to some newly transplanted orchids. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" James asked, approaching. Cautiously, she turned, surprised by her father-in-law's presence. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. How can I help you?" James took a seat on a nearby bench and gestured for her to join him. "I wanted to talk to you about Peter and about you." Sarah visibly tensed. "Is there a problem?" No, James reassured her. "In fact, I'm more than satisfied with the changes I've seen in my son, and a large part of that credit goes to you." Sarah relaxed a bit, but remained on guard. "I've only tried to fulfill my part of the agreement, Mr. Thompson." James looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "I think you've done much more than that, Sarah, and that's precisely what I want to talk to you about. I've noticed that between you and Peter, well, it seems something more than a simple friendship has developed." Sarah felt her cheeks reddening. "Mr. Thompson, James raised a hand to stop her. "You don't need to explain yourself. I just want to make sure you both are clear about what's at stake. This agreement was made for a specific purpose, and although I'm pleased to see that Peter is maturing, I don't want either of you to get hurt when the time comes to make difficult decisions." Sarah nodded slowly, processing James's words. "I understand your concern, Mr. Thompson. I assure you that both Peter and I are aware of the temporary nature of this agreement." James looked at her with compassion. "Sometimes, Sarah, the heart has different plans than those, dictated by reason. I just ask both of you to be careful and honest, both with each other and with yourselves." With these words, James stood up and left the greenhouse, leaving Sarah immersed in her thoughts. The conversation with her father-in-law had brought to the surface all the doubts and fears she had been trying to ignore. Meanwhile, Peter was in the boardroom of Thompson Enterprises, presenting a new project to the board of directors. To everyone's surprise, including his own, his presentation was impeccable. He spoke confidently about market strategies, financial projections, and expansion plans. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. One of the oldest directors approached to congratulate him. "Impressive, Peter. Your father must be proud. Who would have thought that the party boy would turn into such a capable businessman?" Peter smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "Thanks, I guess it was time to grow up." As he gathered his things, Peter couldn't help but think of Sarah. It had been her who had helped him prepare the presentation, staying up late to review the numbers with him and offering words of encouragement when he felt insecure. He realized how much he had come to depend on her support and her presence in his life. Back at the mansion, Peter looked for Sarah to share the good news. He found her in the library, surrounded by books and notes, studying for her final exams. "Sarah," he exclaimed, entering enthusiastically. The presentation was a success. Everyone was impressed. Sarah looked up from her books, a smile lighting up her face. "Peter, that's wonderful. I knew you'd do great." Without thinking, Peter wrapped her in a spontaneous hug. Sarah tensed for a moment before relaxing in his arms. When they separated, they both looked at each other with a mixture of joy and confusion. "I thank you," Peter murmured. "I couldn't have done it without you." Sarah, still stunned by the hug, responded softly, "Of course you could have. You always had the potential, Peter. You just needed to believe in yourself." They looked at each other in silence for a moment, the tension between them growing. Finally, Peter broke the silence. "Sarah, I think we need to talk." She nodded, her heart beating rapidly. "Yes, I think we do." They sat on the library couch, a prudent distance between them. Peter was the first to speak. "Sarah, these last few months have been different from anything I've ever experienced before. You've changed my life in a way I never imagined possible." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "Peter, He gently interrupted her. "Please, let me finish. I've realized that my feelings for you have changed. I no longer see you just as the woman I married through an agreement. I see you as someone important in my life, someone who I think I could love." Sarah held her breath, her eyes filling with tears. "Peter, I've developed feelings for you too, but I'm scared. This agreement, our marriage, it was supposed to be temporary. What if this is just an illusion? What if when the year is over, we realize it was all a mistake?" Peter took her hands in his. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect, Sarah, but I can promise you that what I feel is real. I'm not the same man I was when we got married. I've changed, I've grown, and a large part of that is thanks to you." Sarah, with tears running down her cheeks, responded, "I've changed too, Peter. With you I've learned to trust, to open up, to dream of a future that seemed impossible before, but I'm afraid that all of this is too good to be true." Peter moved closer to her, his hand gently caressing her cheek. "Maybe it is, Sarah. Maybe this is exactly what we both needed without even knowing it. We can't predict the future, but what if instead of fearing what might happen when the year is over, we focus on the here and now?" Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into Peter's touch. When she opened them again, there was determination in her gaze. "You're right. We can't live in fear of the future. But Peter, if we're going to do this, if we're going to give these feelings a real chance, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Peter responded without hesitation. "Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll be honest with each other. That if at any point you feel this isn't what you want, you'll tell me, and I promise to do the same." Peter nodded solemnly. "I promise, Sarah. Honesty above all." With that promise sealing their new understanding, Peter and Sarah looked at each other, years of barriers and pretenses crumbling between them. Slowly, as if time had slowed down, they drew closer to each other. Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss, full of promises and possibilities. When they separated, they were both smiling, a mixture of relief and excitement on their faces. "So, what do we do now?" Sarah asked, a little breathless. Peter smiled. "Now we live day by day, moment by moment together." The days that followed were like a dream for the couple. They rediscovered their home and their relationship under this new light. Shared meals took on new meaning. Nightly, conversations became deeper and more meaningful. Even their daily tasks, from work in the garden to business meetings, acquired a special glow, knowing they had each other's unconditional support. However, not everything was rosy. As their relationship deepened, new challenges also arose. Peter, although committed to his change, sometimes felt the temptation to return to his old habits. One night, after a particularly stressful business meeting, he found himself in a bar surrounded by his old friends. "Come on, Peter," one of them encouraged. "One drink for old time's sake." Peter looked at the glass of whiskey in front of him, feeling the weight of his past and his present colliding. Just when he was about to give in, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Sarah. "Hope your meeting went well. I'm preparing your favorite dish for dinner. I love you." Those simple words were all Peter needed to find the strength to resist. He left the glass untouched, said goodbye to his friends, and returned home to Sarah. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own challenges. As her final exams approached, stress began to take its toll. One night, Peter found her crying in the library, surrounded by books and papers. "What's wrong, love?" he asked. Worried Sarah, between sobs, confessed, "I'm afraid of failing, Peter. What if I don't pass? What if all of this has been in vain?" Peter sat next to her, hugging her tightly. "Listen to me, Sarah. You're the smartest, most dedicated person I know. You've worked so hard to get here. No matter what happens in those exams, I'm proud of you. And whatever happens, we'll face it together." Those words of encouragement were the balm Sarah needed. With renewed determination, she immersed herself in her studies, with Peter supporting her every step of the way. As they approached the end of the year of their agreement, Peter and Sarah found themselves facing a new series of questions. What would happen when the deadline was met? Would they continue together? How would the outside world react to their relationship now that it was real and not just a business agreement? One afternoon, as they strolled through the garden they had cultivated together, Peter stopped in front of a blooming rosebush. Taking Sarah's hand, he looked into her eyes. "Sarah, these months with you have been the happiest and most meaningful of my life. I don't want this to end when the year is up." Sarah, her heart beating rapidly, responded, "I don't want it to end either, Peter, but what will your father say? What will people say?" Peter smiled, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I don't care what others say, I only care about you, Sarah Mitchell. Would you do me the honor of marrying me, this time for love and forever?" Sarah, with tears of happiness in her eyes, looked at the beautiful ring in the box, and then at Peter. "Yes, Peter, 1,000 times. Yes." They kissed under the setting sun, surrounded by the flowers they had cultivated together, symbols of their growing and flourishing love. However, as they celebrated their engagement, neither of them could imagine the challenges that still awaited them. The outside world, with its prejudices and expectations, would not be long in testing the strength of their love and mutual commitment. The news of Peter Thompson and Sarah Mitchell's engagement spread quickly through the city's high society, generating a mixture of reactions. While some celebrated Peter's transformation and the apparent love story, others viewed the situation with skepticism and disdain. James Thompson, although pleased with the positive changes in his son, couldn't help but feel some concern. One afternoon, he called Peter to his office for a private conversation. "Peter, my son," James began, his voice mixing pride and caution, "I'm impressed by the changes you've made in your life. Your work in the company has been exceptional." Peter smiled, feeling genuinely proud. "Thank you, Dad. It means a lot to hear you say." That James nodded, but his expression turned serious. "However, I must ask you, are you sure you want to continue with this marriage? The initial agreement was for a year. No one would blame you if you decided that's enough." Peter looked at his father with determination. "Dad, I love Sarah. It's not just the agreement anymore. She's changed me. She's made me a better person. I want to spend the rest of my life with her." James sighed. "I understand your feelings, son, but you must be aware that not everyone will view this union favorably. There will be those who say Sarah is only with you for money or social position." "That's ridiculous," Peter protested. "Anyone who knows Sarah knows that's not true." "I know," James responded calmly, "but the business world can be cruel. I need to make sure you're prepared to face those challenges." Peter straightened in his seat. "I am. Dad, I'll face whatever is necessary for Sarah and for our future together." James looked at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "Very well, Peter. You have my blessing and my support. Just remember that the road won't be easy." Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own challenges at the university. Some of her classmates began to treat her differently. Whispers and sidelong glances followed her through the hallways. One day, while studying in the library, one of her classmates, Jessica, approached her. "Sarah, can we talk?" Jessica asked, her tone serious. Sarah nodded, intrigued. "Sure, what's up?" Jessica sat across from her, looking at her with a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Listen, I know it's none of my business, but are you sure about what you're doing? Marrying Peter Thompson?" "People talk, Sarah." Sarah felt her heart accelerate. "What do you mean?" Jessica lowered her voice. "They say this is all an elaborate plan, that you married him for his money, and that now you're manipulating him. You have to understand, Sarah. When a gardener suddenly becomes engaged to one of the most eligible bachelors in the city, people will talk." Sarah stood up, gathering her books with trembling hands. "I appreciate your concern, Jessica, but my relationship with Peter is no one's business but ours. If you'll excuse me, I have to go." She left the library with her head held high, but inside Jessica's words had shaken her. Did people really think that about her? How could she prove that her love for Peter was genuine? That night, when Peter arrived home, he found Sarah sitting on the balcony, her gaze lost on the horizon. "Is everything okay, love?" he asked, sitting next to her. Sarah hesitated for a moment before sharing with Peter what had happened at the university. As she spoke, tears began to fall down her cheeks. Peter listened in silence, his face hardening with each word. "Don't let them affect you, Sarah," he said firmly. "We know the truth. Those who really matter to us know the truth. The rest, well, the rest don't matter. Sarah clung to him, finding comfort in his words and his embrace. But what if this affects your reputation? What if it harms the company? Peter pulled away slightly to look her in the eyes. Listen to me well, Sarah. You are more important to me than any reputation or business. We'll face this together, okay? Sarah nodded, feeling stronger with Peter's support. However, they both knew that this was just the beginning of the challenges they would have to face. In the following weeks, rumors and gossip continued. At a charity gala, Peter and Sarah found themselves at the center of curious glances and barely disguised comments. "Look," a woman whispered to her companion, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "That's the gardener who caught the Thompson heir." What? A scandal? Peter, noticing Sarah's discomfort, took her hand and led her to the center of the dance floor. As they danced a waltz, he whispered in her ear, "Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you affected. You're here because you deserve it, because you're intelligent, beautiful, and the woman I love. Let them talk, all they want." Sarah smiled, finding strength in Peter's words. As they spun on the dance floor, her head held high. She decided that she wouldn't let anyone tarnish her happiness. However, fate had an even greater test in store for the couple one morning as they were having breakfast. James entered the dining room with a grave expression, a newspaper in his hand. "I think you should see this," he said, spreading the newspaper on the table. On the front page, a sensationalist headline screamed, "Scandal in the Thompson family, marriage of convenience?" Below, a photo of Peter and Sarah taken on the day of their initial wedding, along with supposedly exclusive details about the agreement that had initiated their marriage. Peter and Sarah read the article with growing horror. Someone, apparently an informant close to the family, had leaked details of the initial agreement between James and Sarah. The article painted Sarah as an opportunist who had manipulated her way into the Thompson fortune, and Peter as a reformed playboy who had fallen into her trap. "This is a disaster," Peter murmured, his face pale with rage and concern. Sarah, with trembling hands, put down the newspaper. "What are we going to do?" James, who had been observing their reactions, spoke calmly. "We need to handle this carefully. A scandal like this could have serious repercussions for the company and for you personally." Peter stood up from the table, his determination evident. "I'm not going to let this destroy us. Dad, Sarah, and I love each other, and I'm going to fight for our future together, no matter what the press or anyone else says." Sarah, moved by Peter's determination, took his hand. "We're in this together, right?" Peter nodded, squeezing her hand. "Always." James looked at them with a mixture of pride and concern. "All right then, we need a plan. We can't let these rumors get out of control." Over the next few hours, the three worked together to develop a strategy. They decided that the best course of action would be to face the situation head-on, with honesty and transparency. The next day, Peter and Sarah called a press conference in front of a crowd of journalists and cameras. The couple stood united, their hands intertwined. Peter was the first to speak. "We appreciate your presence today. We have decided to directly address the rumors and speculations that have been circulating about our marriage." Taking a deep breath, he continued, "It's true that our marriage began as an unconventional arrangement. My father, concerned about my irresponsible behavior, proposed this arrangement with Sarah. However, what began as an agreement has become something much deeper and more meaningful." Sarah, with a firm voice despite her nervousness, took over. "During this time, we have grown together. We've supported each other in our dreams and aspirations. What we feel for each other is real and genuine." A journalist raised his voice. "But Miss Mitchell, how can we be sure that your intentions are sincere? After all, you were the Thompson family's gardener." Peter, visibly upset by the question, was about to respond when Sarah squeezed his hand, indicating that she would handle it. "It's true, I worked as a gardener," Sarah responded calmly, "and I'm proud of it. That job allowed me to support my sick mother and pay for my studies. But my love for Peter has nothing to do with his money or his social position. I love him for who he is, for how he makes me feel, for how we've grown together." Peter, moved by Sarah's words, added, "Sarah has taught me the value of hard work, of perseverance, Thanks to her, I've found a purpose in my life, beyond parties and frivolity. If anyone has gained from this arrangement, it's me." The questions continued, some kind, others more aggressive, but Peter and Sarah remained united, responding with honesty and frankness. By the end of the conference, many of those present seemed moved by their story. However, not everyone was convinced. In the days that followed, while some media outlets praised the couple's bravery and honesty, others continued to speculate and sow doubts. The stress of the situation began to take its toll. Sarah, in particular, felt increasingly pressured. One night, after another exhausting day of dealing with the press and comments on social media, Sarah broke down. "I can't go on with this, Peter," she sobbed in his arms. Maybe we should end this. For your sake, for your family's sake, and for the company." Peter looked at her, surprised and hurt. "What are you saying, Sarah? Do you want to leave me?" Sarah, with tears in her eyes, replied, "I don't want to, but look at all the damage I'm causing your reputation, your company. Everything is in danger because of me." Peter took Sarah's face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. "Listen to me well, Sarah. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I'm not going to give you up over some rumors or what. People say I love you, and we're going to get through this together." That night marked a turning point for the couple. They realized that to overcome this crisis, they needed to be stronger than ever. In the weeks that followed, Peter and Sarah decided to focus on what really mattered. Sarah immersed herself in her studies, determined to prove her worth beyond her relationship with Peter. For his part, Peter redoubled his efforts in the company, implementing new strategies and closing important deals. Little by little, their actions began to speak louder than any rumor. The employees of Thompson Enterprises noticed the change in Peter, his dedication and his new work ethic. Sarah's professors couldn't stop praising her intelligence and determination. One day, as Sarah presented her final thesis, Peter watched her from the back of the auditorium, his heart swelling with pride. When Sarah finished her presentation, receiving a standing ovation from the evaluation committee, Peter knew they had overcome the worst. That night, as they celebrated Sarah's success, Peter surprised her with a proposal. "Sarah," he said, taking her hands in his, "these months have been difficult, but they've also shown me how strong we are together. I want to renew our vows, this time in front of everyone, to show that our love is real and lasting." Sarah, with tears of happiness in her eyes, nodded. "Yes, Peter, nothing would make me happier." The vow renewal ceremony was held in the garden of the Thompson mansion, the same place where Sarah had worked as a gardener. Friends, family, and even some former skeptics gathered to witness their love. As they exchanged their vows, Peter and Sarah looked into each other's eyes, aware of everything they had overcome, together. "Sarah," Peter said, his voice full of emotion, "when we first got married, it was because of an agreement. Today I'm marrying you out of love by choice, and forever I promise to love you, respect you, and support you every step of the way." Sarah, with tears of happiness rolling down her cheeks, responded, "Peter, you've changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. I promise to always be by your side, in good times and bad, loving you and supporting you unconditionally." As they kissed, sealing their renewed commitment, the applause and cheers of the guests filled the air. James Thompson, watching from the front row, couldn't help but let a tear of pride roll down his cheek. That night, as the party continued, Peter and Sarah snuck away for a moment to the greenhouse, the place where it had all begun. "Are you happy?" Peter asked, hugging Sarah from behind as they looked at the stars through the glass roof. Sarah turned in his arms, her eyes full of love. "More than I ever thought possible, and you?" Peter smiled, softly kissing her lips. "With you, always." As they returned to the party, hand in hand, and with hearts full of love and hope, Peter and Sarah knew that no matter what challenges the future held for them, they would face them together, stronger than ever. The months following the vow renewal brought a peace and stability that Peter and Sarah had long yearned for. The rumors and speculations finally began to dissipate, replaced by stories about both of their professional successes and their dedication to various charitable causes. Sarah, having completed her degree with honors, decided to put her knowledge and passion for nature into practice. With the support of Peter and James, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to environmental conservation and environmental education in underprivileged communities. Green Hope quickly became a reference in the field of conservation. Sarah worked tirelessly, organizing reforestation programs, implementing recycling systems in marginal neighborhoods, and bringing environmental education workshops to schools across the country. Peter, for his part, continued his rise in Thompson Enterprises. Under his leadership, the company began investing in green technologies and sustainable practices, partly inspired by Sarah's work. This new direction not only improved the company's image, but also opened up new business opportunities in emerging markets. One afternoon, as Sarah was working in her office at Green Hope headquarters, she received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Elena Gomez from the Department of Environmental Affairs. We'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss a possible nationwide collaboration." Sarah, surprised and excited, agreed to the meeting that night. She shared the news with Peter over dinner. "That's amazing, love," Peter exclaimed, raising his glass in a toast. "I always knew your work would be recognized on a large scale." Sarah smiled, but Peter noticed a hint of concern in her eyes. "What's wrong? You should be happy." Sarah sighed. "I am. It's just, sometimes I wonder if people take me seriously for my work, or if it's just because I'm a Thompson." Peter took her hand across the table. "Sarah, you've worked incredibly hard to get where you are. Your passion, your dedication, and your intelligence are the reasons for your success. No one can take that away from you." Peter's words comforted Sarah, but the doubt persisted in the back of her mind. The meeting with the Department of Environmental Affairs turned out to be a resounding success. The government proposed a partnership with Green Hope to implement a national environmental education and conservation program. It was an unprecedented opportunity, but also an enormous challenge. As Sarah immersed herself in planning the new project, Peter faced his own challenges at Thompson Enterprises. The transition to more sustainable practices had met with resistance in some sectors of the company, especially among the older executives. One afternoon, during a tense board meeting, one of the executives, Robert Wilson, openly questioned Peter's decisions. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," Wilson said, his tone barely hiding his disdain, "these new green initiatives are costing the company millions. Are you sure you're not letting your personal affairs influence business decisions?" Peter felt his blood boil, but he kept his cool. "Mr. Wilson, I understand your concern, but if you look at the long-term projections, you'll see that these investments are not only ethical, but also highly profitable. The future of business is green, and Thompson Enterprises will be at the forefront of that revolution." Despite the tension, Peter managed to convince the majority of the board. However, he knew he had won a battle, but not the war. There was still much work to be done to change the mindset within the company. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own detractors. As Green Hope gained prominence, some critics began to question her leadership, insinuating that her position was due more to her last name than to her merits. One day, during a live interview on a national television program, the host confronted her directly. "Mrs. Thompson, many people wonder if your organization would have been so successful if you weren't married to Peter Thompson. What would you say to those who suggest that your position is a result of nepotism?" Sarah felt her heart racing, but she maintained her composure. "I understand those concerns," she responded calmly, "but I invite you to look at the work that Green Hope has done in recent years. Our results speak for themselves. Yes, the Thompson name has opened doors for me. I won't deny that. But what I do, once those doors are open, depends entirely on my work and that of my team." Sarah's response was widely applauded, but the incident left a mark on her. That night, as she shared her concerns with Peter, they made an important decision. "Maybe it's time for Green Hope to become completely independent from Thompson Enterprises," Peter suggested. That way no one can question your leadership or the integrity of the organization. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement at the idea. You're right. It will be difficult, but it's the right thing to do. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah worked tirelessly to secure independent funding for Green Hope, while Peter focused on the transition within Thompson Enterprises. The process was not without challenges. There were sleepless nights, heated discussions, and moments of doubt. But through it all, Peter and Sarah remained united, supporting each other every step of the way. Finally, the day of the big announcement arrived. In a joint press conference, Peter and Sarah revealed the complete independence of Green Hope from Thompson Enterprises, as well as the company's new sustainable direction. This is a new chapter for both organizations, Peter declared before the cameras. Thompson Enterprises is committed to leading the way towards a more sustainable future in the business world. Sarah, by his side, added, and Green Hope will continue its mission to protect our planet and educate future generations, now as a completely independent entity. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The media praised the transparency and commitment of both to their respective causes. Even the harshest critics were forced to acknowledge the merit of their actions. That night, after an exhausting day of interviews and meetings, Peter and Sarah finally arrived home, exhausted but satisfied. They sat on the balcony of their room contemplating the stars. "We did it," Sarah whispered, leaning against Peter's chest. Peter hugged, her tightly, softly kissing her hair. "Yes, we did. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. You've proven your worth time and time again." Sarah looked up, her eyes shining with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Peter. Your support, your love, have given me the strength to face all these challenges." They remained silent for a moment, enjoying the peace of the night and each other's company. It was then that Sarah noticed something different about Peter. He seemed nervous, almost anxious. "Is everything okay, love?" she asked, sitting up to look at him better. Peter took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Sarah, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Peter?" Peter stood up, taking Sarah's hands in his. "These years with you have been the happiest of my life. We've faced so many challenges together, and each one has made us stronger. And now, with everything we've accomplished, I think it's the perfect time to take the next step." Sarah held her breath as Peter knelt before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Sarah Mitchell Thompson," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Would you do me the honor of starting a family with me, of being the mother of our children?" Tears sprang from Sarah's eyes as a smile lit up her face. "Oh, Peter, yes. 1,000 times yes." Peter slipped a beautiful ring onto her finger, a promise of their future together, before standing up and wrapping Sarah in a passionate embrace. They kissed under the stars, their hearts beating in unison with the excitement of this new adventure they were about to embark on. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as Sarah and Peter prepared for the arrival of their first child. They also continued to work hard on their respective projects. Sarah, determined to maintain her independence and her career, found creative ways to balance her pregnancy with her responsibilities at Green Hope. She implemented flexible work policies that not only benefited her, but all the employees of the organization, setting a new standard in the industry. Peter, for his part, immersed himself in preparation for fatherhood. He attended all medical appointments with Sarah, read books on parenting, and even took prenatal yoga classes with her, much to the amusement and admiration of his employees. One afternoon, as they were decorating the baby's room, Sarah noticed that Peter seemed worried. "What's wrong, love?" she asked, putting aside the brush she was using to paint a forest mural on the wall. Peter sighed, sitting on the floor next to her. "It's just, what if I'm not a good father? Sarah, my own father, although I love him, wasn't always the best example. What if I make the same mistakes?" Sarah took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Peter, look at me. You're going to be a wonderful father. Besides, you're not alone in this. We'll do it together. We'll learn together." Peter smiled, feeling comforted by Sarah's words. "You're right together. We can handle anything, right?" "That's right," Sarah nodded, leaning in to kiss him softly. The day of their son Daniel's birth arrived in the midst of a torrential storm. Peter drove like a madman to the hospital, with Sarah breathing heavily beside him. After hours of labor, they were finally able to hold their little one in their arms. "He's perfect," Peter whispered, tears in his eyes as he looked at his son Sarah, exhausted but radiant, nodded, "Welcome to the world, Daniel Thompson Mitchell. You are so loved." The first months of parenthood were challenging, full of sleepless nights and exhausting days, but Peter and Sarah faced them together, supporting each other every step of the way. Sarah returned to work after her maternity leave, determined to prove that it was possible to be a dedicated mother and a successful business leader at the same time. She implemented a daycare center in the Green Hope offices, setting a precedent that many other companies soon followed. Peter, inspired by his new role as a father, pushed for more generous parental leave policies at Thompson Enterprises, earning the respect and loyalty of his employees. As Daniel grew, Peter and Sarah marveled at how their love seemed to multiply. Every milestone, every smile, every little achievement of their son was a source of immense joy. One night, as they were putting 2-year-old Daniel to bed, Sarah looked at Peter and felt her heart swell with love. "You know something," she said softly so as not to wake the child. "When I agreed to marry you for that arrangement, I never imagined it would end up like this, with a family, a purpose, and happier than I ever thought possible." Peter hugged her from behind, both watching their son sleep peacefully. "I didn't imagine it either, but I'm infinitely grateful that life has brought us here." They kissed softly, the love between them stronger than ever. The years passed and the Thompson-Mitchell family grew and prospered. Green Hope became a world-renowned organization, with Sarah at the helm, leading conservation initiatives across the planet. Thompson Enterprises, under Peter's leadership, transformed into a model of sustainable and ethical business. Daniel grew to be a bright and compassionate young man, inspired by the example of his parents. And although Peter and Sarah faced challenges along the way, their love and mutual commitment never wavered. One afternoon, years later, Peter and Sarah found themselves in the same garden where it had all begun. They watched Daniel, now a teenager, teaching his younger sister how to plant a tree. "Do you ever regret it?" Peter asked suddenly. Sarah looked at him intrigued. "Regret what?" "Accepting that crazy deal, all those years ago. Marrying me when you barely knew me." Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with Peter's. "Not for a second. It was the best decision I've ever made in my life." Peter drew her close, kissing her with all the love accumulated over years of shared life. "I love you, Sarah Thompson Mitchell, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Peter Thompson," Sarah responded, her heart overflowing with happiness. As the sun set over the garden, bathing the family in a golden light, Peter and Sarah reflected on their journey from a marriage of convenience to a deep and lasting love. They had built a life together that surpassed any fairy tale. And so, in the same place where once a gardener and a rebellious heir had first met, now a family united by love and mutual respect looked to the future, ready to face any challenge that life might present them, always together, always strong. As the years continued to pass, Peter and Sarah found themselves entering a new phase of life. There, children were growing up and starting to forge their own paths. Daniel, now in his early 20s, had followed in his mother's footsteps and was studying environmental science at a prestigious university. Their daughter Emma was showing a keen interest in business and often shadowed her father at Thompson Enterprises. Despite their busy lives and successful careers, Peter and Sarah always made time for each other and their family. They had learned over the years that their strength came from their unity, and they never took that for granted. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Peter with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft. "We've accomplished so much, both professionally and personally. but there's still so much more we could do. Peter smiled, recognizing the spark of enthusiasm in his wife's eyes. What did you have in mind, love? Sarah's eyes lit up as she shared her idea. I was thinking about expanding Green Hope's reach. We've done great work here in the States, but what if we took our initiatives global? There are so many communities around the world. That could benefit from our programs. Peter nodded, already seeing the possibilities. That's a fantastic idea, Sarah. And you know what? I think Thompson Enterprises could play a role in that too. We could create a joint initiative, combining our resources and expertise. As they discussed their plans, their excitement grew. They spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas, their passion for making a difference as strong as ever. Over the next few months, Peter and Sarah worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They faced challenges, of course, logistical hurdles, cultural differences, and skeptics who doubted their ability to make a global impact. But just as they had done throughout their lives together, they faced each obstacle head-on, supporting each other every step of the way. Their children, now young adults, were inspired by their parents' continued dedication and drive. Daniel joined the Green Hope team, bringing fresh ideas and youthful energy to the organization. Emma, with her sharp business acumen, helped Thompson Enterprises navigate the complexities of international expansion. As their initiative grew, Peter and Sarah found themselves traveling the world, setting up sustainable development projects in underprivileged communities, implementing green technologies, and educating people about environmental conservation. They worked with local leaders, governments, and other organizations, creating a network of change that spanned the globe. Their work didn't go unnoticed. International media picked up on their story, not just focusing on their successful business ventures, but on the unique partnership that was at the heart of it all. Journalists were fascinated by the tale of the gardener and the heir who had built an empire, based on love, mutual respect, and a shared vision for a better world one day. As they stood together in a newly established community garden in a small village in Africa, surrounded by smiling children and grateful adults, Sarah turned to Peter, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Peter pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "I can," he replied, "because it's you, Sarah. You've always had this incredible ability to see the potential for good in everything and everyone. You saw it in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the same rush of love she had felt all those years ago. "We did this together, Peter, every step of the way." As they stood there, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and love, Peter and Sarah realized that their journey was far from over. They had started with a marriage of convenience, grown into a partnership of love, and now they were leaving a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their story of love, growth, perseverance, and the power of working together towards a common goal inspired countless others. Young couples looked to them as role models, aspiring to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Businesses studied their model of ethical, sustainable growth, and individuals around the world were motivated by their message that one person, or in this case, two people united in love, could indeed make a difference. As the sun began to set on another day of hard work and rewarding achievements, Peter turned to Sarah, a mischievous glint in his eye. "So, Mrs. Thompson," he said, using the formal title that now made them both smile, "what's our next adventure?" Sarah laughed, the sound as joyous and full of life as it had been when they first fell in love. "Well, Mr. Thompson," she replied, playing along, "I believe we have a world to change, one garden at a time." Hand in hand, they walked back to their temporary home, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey they had shared and excitement for the path that still lay ahead. They had long ago surpassed the terms of their initial agreement, creating a love story that was as enduring as it was inspiring. And so the tale of Peter and Sarah Thompson continued to unfold, a testament to the power of love, second chances, and the incredible things that can happen when two people decide to face life's challenges together. Their legacy would live on not just in their children or their global initiatives, but in the countless lives they touched and the example they set for generations to come. As they reached their temporary home, they paused for a moment, looking back at the village they had helped transform. The once barren land was now dotted with green spaces, solar panels glinted on rooftops, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. It was a physical manifestation of their life's work, a blend of Sarah's environmental passion and Peter's business acumen, all fueled by their shared commitment to making the world a better place. "You know," Peter said, his voice thoughtful, "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my father hadn't come up with that crazy scheme all those years ago." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." Peter smiled, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "You're right, as always, but I'm grateful for how it happened. It gave me the kick I needed to grow up and see what was truly important in life." As they entered their home, they were greeted by a flurry of activity. Their children, along with a team of dedicated workers, were hunched over laptops and scattered papers, planning the next phase of their global initiative. Daniel looked up as they entered, his face lighting up. "Mom, Dad, you're back. We've just received word from the team in South America. The reforestation project is exceeding all expectations." Emma chimed in, her eyes shining with excitement. "And the microloan program we set up in Southeast Asia is showing amazing results. Small businesses are flourishing, and they're all committed to sustainable practices." Peter and Sarah shared a proud look. Their children had not only embraced their parents' vision, but were actively expanding upon it, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative ideas to the table. As the evening wore on, the house buzzed with discussion and planning. Ideas were shared, challenges were addressed, and solutions were found. It was a family affair in the truest sense, with each member contributing their unique strengths to the shared goal. Later that night, as Peter and Sarah prepared for bed, exhausted but exhilarated from the day's events, Sarah turned to her husband with a soft smile. "You know, Peter, when I first agreed to marry you, I never imagined this would be my life. I thought I was sacrificing my dreams for a greater good. But instead, I found a partner who not only supported my dreams, but helped me expand them beyond anything I could have imagined." Peter pulled her close, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "And I found a woman who saw potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. You didn't just stand by my side, Sarah. You inspired me to be better, to do better. Every day with you has been a gift." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Peter and Sarah Thompson knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more problems to solve, more lives to touch. But they would face it all together, just as they had for all these years. Their story, which began as a business arrangement, had blossomed into a tale of love, growth, and global change. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from unexpected beginnings, and that with love, determination, and a shared vision, two people can indeed change the world. As the African night settled around them, stars twinkling in the vast sky, Peter and Sarah Thompson slept peacefully, ready to wake up the next day and continue their lifelong journey of love and purpose. Their legacy would live on, not just in the global changes they had set in motion, but in the hearts of all those who knew their story. A testament to the enduring power of love, second chances, and the incredible potential that lies within each of us to make a difference.